I think one of the definable markers of our current society is that we have lots of options. Like, there's really no shortage of options in most areas of life. Like, well, think about it. You want to find a boyfriend, a girlfriend you want to date, you just, pick through your options on a dating app. There's like, there's like 100 options. It seems every time I hear someone talking about it, there's a new app. It's like, do we really need more options on the app that's full of options? It just seems unnecessary. But I guess if it's working for you and your love life is good because of it, you do you. But beyond that, even like if you're living really far away, like when I was a kid, you could only really go to the restaurants in your general neighborhood. Like you couldn't go to the other end of town. If you're like, Mom, Dad, I want to go to this new restaurant, and it's like, I lived on the southeast corner of Edmonton, like literally on the other side of my house was farmland. And it's like, I want to go to the northwest end to try out this new restaurant we heard about. It's like, we're not driving 45 minutes to go to that restaurant. Now, just go on your phone, and you can pick any restaurant in all of Edmonton, and you could have it delivered for a crazy fee. Let me tell you, I looked at my Skip the Dishes receipts a couple months ago. They've been stealing from me and I didn't even know it. It's awful, but it's so expensive. But the convenience is there and you have so many options. You don't want to eat meat? There are vegan meat. I'm not here to get political, but vegan chicken is a lie. It's not chicken. I think that we shouldn't be able to say things that aren't true, so maybe we should put some sort of law in place that you can't call it that. But if that's you, you like that? You like the Beyond Burger? Beyond what? What's it beyond? It's beyond tasting good, that's what I'll tell you. Anyways, maybe you liked it, you're allowed to. I don't. There are so many options. And even like, man, when I was a kid, when I was a teenager, even when I was kind of an adult, it changed really quick. You wanted to watch a movie, on the weekend, you had to go to the Blockbuster, Rogers Video, or the like random neighborhood video store that's run by some shady person. Where you're like, how did you start a video store? Why is that your entrepreneurial move that you were gonna do? It's like, I wanna commit my life to something. I'm gonna start my own video rental store. But we would go there and we would get a rental. Then Netflix came out and it was just like, that was the only thing. Netflix had so many options and it blew our minds for like $7 a month. Now it's like $707 a month. And I can't even share it with my friends anymore, and it's not HD if I don't get the more expensive version. But we got that, and it was enough, and it was great. Now, there's a million options of streaming services. Like, it's crazy. Every single company has got their own version of a streaming service. I think I'm just waiting for them to come out with Arby's Video Plus. Arby's is gonna start their own. You get your beef and cheddar, which is delicious, by the way, or your curly fries. That's why Arby's is amazing. Curly fries. What other, McDonald's fries? Nah, they're not curly enough. They're not good. And I'm expecting for something, every company is trying to get on this streaming train as quickly as possible. And we're so used to having options in our lives over and over again. In every corner of our lives, we have options. We don't have to be cornered in. We feel like we have the world at our fingertips with everything. And when we don't, those rare moments where we don't have control, where we don't feel like we have options, it is infuriating. Let me tell you, this summer, for a brief amount of time, I was not at home and the internet stopped working on my phone. 5G? No. Not even 3G. Nothing. It was completely useless. And I found myself having to kill some time in between appointments in my car. My favorite sports radio station had just been taken off the air. And it's like, what else is this radio good for? Even that's kind of random. And I'm sitting there and I'm just thinking, what do I do? And I found myself just like regularly out of habit pulling my smartphone out, my iPhone out, and trying to open Instagram or TikTok or something to numb the pain of having to be alone with my own thoughts for 5 minutes. And I would just realize every time I opened it, I was more and more angry that I didn't have all the options. I was going to maybe my email will work. Email's fun, right? Just going over and over, just trying to find something that would connect to the internet just out of basic habit. And let's be honest, habit addiction, same thing. I got more and more angry every time I picked up that phone out of habit. And I got to the point where I was like, this is unacceptable. Who Who pressed the wrong button at Rogers, at Bell? Whoever did it, is this the government? Is this Trudeau? I don't know what's happening, but somebody made a big mistake. Injustice has been done against me, and somebody is gonna have to pay. Somebody's gonna have to, I'm gonna have to talk to somebody. Someone's gonna be held accountable. I'm gonna drive to the internet, and I'm gonna talk to them. Where is the internet? I'll Google Maps. You're just like losing your mind because you actually have to deal with this thing. And there was no options at all for the first time. You don't realize how many options we have until we don't have any. And we get kind of frustrated, and we don't like that. We don't respond well to that because we're used to it. When somebody comes and tells us, no, here's the hard line, here is the one way you can go, we get really worked up about it because it's not kind of our default. It feels like we have a deficit of choices, like it's actually injustice done against us. And yeah, with the cell phone and the internet, it's kind of a bit of a funny version of it, and it's true. But on more important things, ask yourself this: when you feel like you don't have the options you're used to in our culture, how do you react? How do you react when you don't get the option or the options that you've preferred? So we're starting this new series this week at the Project, like Pastor Ruben just said, on the book of Galatians. It's called Off the Chain. And this is a letter from a pastor. Pastor Paul was his name. He actually was somebody who was very, very against Christianity. Like, he was a Pharisee, a Jewish leader, and he was hunting down Christians and even oversaw the murder of some of them. And Jesus drastically changes his life, and next thing you know, he's done a full 180. He's gone the other direction, and he's a huge advocate. He's planting churches, and he actually wrote a good chunk of the second half of the Bible, which is the New Testament. New Testament starts when Jesus' life begins, and it's the second half. And so he's writing this book to a church in a place called Galatia, hence why it's called Galatians. So he's writing to this church because he's heard of some things that are going on in this. And I encourage you this week to open your Bible. If you don't have a Bible, talk to us at the Connect booth. We'd love to get one in your hands. Or you can go to the App Store and just type Bible, and it's right there. The YouVersion is a great place to start. But look through Galatians, and we're going to start off right in chapter 1 where he's kind of setting the table. Pastor Paul has heard like there's these things going on in the church, and he's not super pumped about them. There's some concerning things that he needs to address because he's a leader. And Paul is a great example of leadership. One leadership principle that I wanted to highlight that really just kind of exemplifies his life, that he shows through everything he does and every writings that he has, is that he will not run away from a hard conversation. And we can learn this about him, that he actually will always address bad things directly. He doesn't run away from the conflict. But the one thing that he does that I love, and that sometimes we can get caught up in when we're trying to lead people, is that we don't love the people that we lead. Paul was a leader, but he always loved the people that he led. So if you're leading in any sense in your own life, in your work, in your school, whatever you're doing, is that you need to remember, we need to remember to always love the people that we lead, because Jesus did that as well. He would always direct his disciples, his 12 best friends, or the people that would follow him, these young guys, these young adult guys that were literally following him everywhere. They'd go off and do something or say something so dumb, and then he would like correct them, but it was always in love. He never hid from the truth. He never avoided a hard conversation, but he always approached truth, but always in a way that was not because he didn't want to have those hard conversations, but because he loved people too much to not tell them the hard truth at times. And that's what Paul's doing here. So we're going to start off in Galatians 1. We'll start off with verses 6 to 1. It says, Paul says to the church, I'm astonished that you are so quickly deserting the one who called you to live in the grace of Christ and are turning to a different gospel, which is really no gospel at all. Evidently, some people are throwing you into confusion and are trying to pervert the gospel of Christ. But even if we or an angel from heaven should preach a gospel other than the one we preach to you, let them be under God's curse. It's aggressive. As we have already said, so now I say again, if anyone is preaching to you a gospel other than what you accepted, let them be under God's curse. He says it twice. It's probably important. Am I now trying to win the approval of human beings or of God? Or am I trying to please people? If I were still trying to please people, I wouldn't be a servant of Christ. So there's this fake gospel that's going around. There's this version of the gospel that he's hearing that they're starting to accept. It's kind of seeping into the church. You're thinking like, what is a gospel? You've probably heard that, like the gospel of Jesus, the gospel. But what is gospel? Gospel is actually an Old English term. And what it meant is good news. It's also kind of contemporarily seen as truth, but really the original word is good news. So the gospel of Jesus is the gospel. But he's saying that there's these other ones, there's this other kind of variant versions of it that are coming into the church, and he's becoming concerned because it's diluting, it's perverting what is being communicated, the truth that needs to be there, the good news. There's many good news situations. There's many examples of good news back then and today. And that happens in our lives, that happens in our world. There's all sorts of ideologies, there's all sorts of thinkers. If your algorithm on YouTube or TikTok, it can be very confusing because you could have one person, it's usually one trajectory because that's an algorithm, but like one person could say one thing and the other person could say something else and you're like, yeah, I agree with both those people. And they would like fight each other if they saw each other. But there's good things about all of this. There's lots of options on good news. But Paul's concerned because they're abandoning the best news. They're abandoning what he said. And he says it's in place of people-pleasing because they don't want to have that hard conversation, because they don't want to have to share the hard truth, the hard reality with people in their church. So then it continues on. He says, I want you to know, brothers and sisters, that the gospel I preached is not one of human origin. I did not receive it from any man, nor was I taught it. Rather, I received it by revelation from Jesus Christ. For you've heard of my previous way of life in Judaism, how intensely I persecuted the church of God and tried to destroy it. I was advancing in Judaism beyond many of my own age among my people and was extremely zealous for the traditions of my fathers. But when God, who set me apart from my mother's womb and called me by grace, was pleased to reveal his Son in me, so that I might preach him among the Gentiles, my immediate response was not to consult in any human being. What he's saying is that it's so easy to get caught up in the different good news or examples, options of good news in our society. The same back then, 2,000 years ago or so, as today. It's hard to pick when there's so many options. It's easy if there was only one, if it was just like very clear, like there's a very narrow, yeah, everything else is horrible, there's nothing redeeming about any of these other ideas, but let's focus on this one thing and it's relevant and you can't even deny it. But that's not how human nature works. You get people who come in, often just by accident, you get a variant in alignment with what's good and what's true. Or you get bad people, like cult leaders, we can think of those examples, or people who will just take advantage of power and use things that are slightly good and twist them for their own gain and take advantage of people, take advantage of their finances, their lives, do all these different things that are inherently bad, but they twist good news to be able to push their own agenda forward. This is something that will happen, you will face on some level, you'll have the opportunity to fall into it. It looks attractive, it sounds good, but it's gonna lead you down destruction. So I wanna talk to you about how do we avoid these things? How do we avoid the bad news, good news, the examples that are options of goodish news and not abandon the best news, which is Jesus? So I wanna talk about 3 false gods that will ruin your life, 3 idols, 3 things that are goodish news. But if you follow, it will lead you farther and farther away from the best, from what will be best for your life, the best version of you possible. The first one is this: legalism. You've probably heard of this before. This is a real popular thing. There's a lot of deconstruction culture in people that grew up in church, is that legalism, or this kind of rigid suit and tie idea of church, or just rule-oriented church, organization, religious, whatever it is. I think that all of us kind of have a picture of what we think of when we hear the word legalism. But it's not a new thing. It's not something that we just kind of created when TikTok came into culture, where we can share our stories, where something was a little more rule-based or maybe intensely more rule-based than it should have been, and we felt hurt by that. It was actually a huge issue 2,000 years ago in a very different way. Paul was a Pharisee, a Jewish religious leader, and one of the things that Jesus had come to correct when he lived and when he was on earth was the legalism of that time. The church had taken, or the Jewish church and the Pharisees and the religious leaders had taken this good news of Jesus, of God, and the best way to live your life. And they took that and they were using it for their own advantage to kind of puff up their chest and show, look how religious I am. Look how good I am at keeping the law. There's all these rules that God gave us. I'm the best at that. And they were kind of like flexing their authority because of that. But it wasn't because they loved the people they were leading. It was because they were insecure and they wanted to manipulate this into a way that would make them look good. They weren't focused on what was best for the people. They were actually focused on the legalism. And what legalism is it's putting religious performance ahead of your character development and your discipleship and how you would look and act and think more like God. It's putting more into the behavior modification than into the heart modification. Don't get me wrong. This is where we get it kind of twisted at some points. Is that if you do follow God, if you do pattern your life after Jesus, if you subscribe to a Jesus-based life, your behavior does need to change. But it changes not because you just grit against your just straight discipline. David Goggins it, like just go at everything, 100%, cold showers at 4 a.m., that type of thing. No, it's because your heart changes and then your behavior can't help but change. Your behavior will follow your heart. If you do it the opposite way around, you will always stumble back into your previous patterns, and you'll find yourself in a destructive space. Legalism judges others, and it's rooted in arrogance and ego. Well, Jesus literally lived the opposite of that. Jesus lived humility. Jesus was the opposite of legalism. And like I said, he came to kind of expose that and to change that, in addition to bringing relationship between you and God and giving an eternal hope for you in heaven as well. And this is something that we get caught up in even today because it's the nature of human beings to twist things. It's not just leaders, it's not just pastors, it's not just politicians, it's the character and the posture of our own heart. We get caught up in rule-based things. We get caught up even when we have the best intentions to just kind of have our own preferences be the most important. And so if you get caught up in legalism, if you get so caught up in the behavior modification and the rule-based side of things that you miss out on the relationship and the heart change and the joy that can come from following God, Jesus, who died on the cross for you and loved you enough that he would have died just for you alone, let alone the entire world. It's not that you're just behaving poorly. You're missing out because you could be so much more. You can experience so much more. And God has so much more for you. And if you had an experience where that was your experience in church and you're like, I want nothing to do with that. I can't believe I'm watching online tonight. I can't believe I'm even here right now because of what experience it was. I'm sorry that happened. But Jesus wants to have a relationship with you. And just because something happened that was legalistic or wrong or however you want to describe that, don't miss out on everything that God has for you because of the wound or the callus that you've built up. It's not an overnight thing. I'm not saying get over it. I'm saying give Jesus a chance because you can be and can have so much more in your life. Number 2 is liberalism. And again, I'm not getting political here. I'm not talking about the Liberal Party. I'm not talking about a social movement. But this was a thing that was happening back then and has always happened. It's human nature. We want to bend the rules. We want to manipulate the rules to be able to fit our worldview. And this is kind of like the same thing as legalism, but it's just on the opposite side, where legalism is kind of very rigid and let's like focus everything and manipulate, for our own gain. Liberalism on the other side is taking liberties with truth to benefit our own experience. It's usually a lot more personalized and more experiential. It's usually a loosening of things because we don't want to be disciplined, because we don't want to have the grit to be able to get the joy on the other side of that discipline. And this happens in our culture today a lot, and it's because we want to enjoy every element. We want every option in life. This happens in our theology. Theology is kind of how we think about God and in how we identify God and in who we believe God to be. And often you'll see people in the same sense of deconstructing their faith be like, well, we can kind of bend this more towards less away from what I feel is too rigid of a rule. Even though the Bible says this, I don't think that that's correct, because I would prefer this version of sexuality, of just what I'm allowed to do, of what is and isn't good for me. I don't, the Bible says this, but I just think I'm gonna pick most of this. I'm gonna take the love stuff, but I'm not gonna, this is a hard truth. I don't wanna talk about that. Let's just ignore this part of it. There's too much discipline. You have to have some grit there. Let's focus on the parts that I like, because that seems like a lot of fun. And it is. And you'll have a lot of fun, and it feels like you're getting the best of both worlds. I can have my cake, and I can eat it too. Great. But you'll find yourself on the other end of that with a perverted gospel. That's what Paul talks about. A man-made gospel that doesn't actually worship God. It aims that way, it presents that way, but it actually is a worship of self. It's a worship of pleasure. It's really saying, I don't follow Jesus, but not having the guts to just say it out loud. And so liberalism and just the taking liberties with what God has designed us to be, with what God's best for your life is, it may feel good in the moment, but it isn't helping you at all. And that's why the truth matters. That's why the good news, not always the easiest news, the gospel, Jesus Christ, that relationship that you can have with him, it's not easy, but it is the best way. And truth matters. I know we live in a society where it's just like everyone has their own truth and my truth, and I'm not gonna, again, get caught up in all of that. But know this, your truth doesn't trump God's truth. It never has, it never will. No matter how much you want it to, no matter how much it's easier, no matter how much I would prefer it, no matter how difficult some of those conversations can be, the truth is what it is. Jesus is who he is. And the Bible is true and shows us the person of Jesus and how we can best reflect our lives after Jesus. If we don't know the God that we're aiming to be like, and we don't actually know what he said and how he lived his life while he was on earth, what Jesus was asking us to reflect, then we'll never reflect it accurately. And so, yeah, it may be easy to numb the edges, to take the edges off and dull them a little bit. It may feel better. It may be a little more presentable to our friends and our family. But at the end of the day, the truth matters. And I love you too much to not tell you the truth. And so I say this all to just put it on you. Don't settle for less than what is true. Don't take the side that isn't disciplined. Don't go the softer route, because don't get me wrong, following Jesus is awesome. A Jesus-based life will change everything about you. It's the best decision you can make in your life is to follow Jesus, but there will be times where you have to be disciplined, where you have to go against the grain, where you have to swim upstream. And let me tell you, friends, it is so worth it. It is worth it, even for all the difficult times, for all the potential hardships that are there. The benefits, the joys are so much exponentially better than anything that we'll experience on the negative side. So truth matters, seek Jesus, and it's all there in the Bible. You have to do some work, get a good commentary, come to church, join a small group, but don't ever stop seeking truth, because on the other side of truth is hope. So that's liberalism. And this is the one I really want to camp on. Because number 3 is cultural idols. We kind of hit this a little bit. In Matthew 22, verses 36 to 40, it says, Jesus said, which is the greatest commandment? Or someone asked him that, and he says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. The most important commandment, the greatest commandment, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. And the second, similarly important, love your neighbor as yourself. Listen, our culture today, we don't have any issue with the idea of loving our neighbor. We'll protest it, we'll get pumped up about it, we'll share it on social media. We are, and rightfully so, I think that's a good thing to seek after, no matter what your worldview is we should love our neighbors, we should be caring, and that's why one of the things that we talk about here that we repeat over and over is that our church, the project, Hope City, we are for Edmonton. We love our city, we love our community. We try to do everything as local as possible. That's why last week we took over Teepsy Lounge on White Ave, a local business, and had a lineup out the door and pack that place out. We love the people in our city, we love our businesses, we love our neighbor. It goes beyond business, just helping people out who are in need, that neighbor who's financially struggling. It's living with a perspective of other people, and that's great. That's a virtue in our culture. We all, like, if you see someone do that, you're like, that's a good person. And so we want to be seen as good people. We have no issue with that. But the first part of that verse is not so easy. To just love God and only God. To put God as the number one in your life. To have God be the only thing, the only one that you worship. To have no other idols in your life. And so, like, what is an idol? An idol, historically, in the Bible, when people were worshiping idols, it was like a bronze calf, like a baby cow, or like some sort of just statue of something. And you might see that in past history or in Egyptian literature and just these pictures of what's happened historically. But we don't really do that anymore. There's some parts of the world that do, but here in Western society, that's not really what I'm talking about, more or less. But we put our faith into these other things. We worship these new age ideas like astrology or the universe. We do our daily affirmations, our self-talk in the mirror. We have all these different things we go to, different religions perhaps, or different online leaders or influencers, social justice movements that we put our identity in, that we're like, this is who I am. I'm with this group, I'm with this person on YouTube, this person on TikTok. I care and I identify as part of this. It's not wrong to have people that are influential in your life, thought leaders, people that provoke thought, that make you think, that maybe make you better. And it doesn't just have to be a pastor or somebody who's in a church. But when we put our faith into literally anything that isn't God, that's an idol. Any person or any object or any movement, anything that we put more faith in, that we put more of our identity into that isn't God, is an idol. And it will not only be just a waste of your time in the end, it will steal what's best for your life. It will rob you of what's best for your life. And it may seem like it presents as good, but it will slowly erode at your best case scenario for your world. For your world around you, for your internal world, for your family, for your friends. You will not achieve everything that you're capable of if you allow these idols, these other things, to get in the way. The truth is, we are people, humans that are designed to worship. And if we don't know God, if we don't know who Jesus is, we will bow to whatever is in front of us. Historically, biblically, even today we can see this. We will bend the knee to destructive idols in our life, idols of this world. Money, we'll chase that, and then we'll lose it, and we'll chase it again, and we're exhausted because we're working 80 hours a week, or we put all of our faith in the financial system that just seems to always crush us. As a millennial, I feel that, and I know Gen Z ain't feeling much better about it. Home ownership seems really far away for most people. But if you're chasing that, and that's your identity, that's what will make you happy, you may never feel fulfilled. You will never feel fulfilled. Sex, chasing after other bodies, or just finding your value in how your own body looks. Yeah, you might look good now, but no one looks good at 80. Tattooed, I don't care how much you go to the gym, you're not gonna look great. You might look good for 80, but everyone dies. Everybody ages. Everything that you feel is beautiful now will age. Putting your faith in things that will age and rust and rot will leave you empty at the end of it. Our looks, money, the things we own, those things are going to not be enough. The truth is, if we don't access the divine, if we don't access who is truly God, the true good news, we will worship the destructive, the profane. We will worship our own identity, our own values, our stuff that we own, and we will bend the knee and worship the algorithm of life. And I'm not trying to get into some weird conspiracy theory, Alex Jones, like, the algorithm's trying to get you and you gotta watch out for it. The algorithm, think about it, it's a code of ones and zeros on your social media. But what it does is it tries to find your lowest common denominator. It figures out, what do you really want? And what we know as Christians, as people who follow Jesus, is that at the core of us right now, we have a brokenness. And what really drives us tempts us is our brokenness and our temptation to sin. Our lowest common denominator is there, and the algorithm is gonna find your weakness, and it will try to, it doesn't care if you save money. It doesn't care if you're charitable. It will do everything it can to find what your lowest common denominator is, your most vulnerable space, the crack in your armor, and then drive you towards buying whatever your weakness is. And sometimes that's great, because now I have a whole bunch of cast iron pans, but nothing in my bank account. But there's a metaphor there that's actually somewhat direct in some ways. Is that when we allow the algorithmic nature of our society to find that thing, that weakness, that insecurity in our lives, and what we feel like we're not enough in, and that idol that will make us feel good in the moment, that we think is going to be that thing that will complete us, that will be the purpose in our life, we're going to feel empty at the other end of it. Because if you chase an idol, you'll never find God. When you put all of your pursuit in something that has no power but presents as everything you need, you will never find what you truly need. And friends, listen, you need Jesus. And maybe no one's ever said that directly to you, but if you don't have Jesus in your life, and not just a knowledge of who Jesus is, not just a necklace around your neck that has a cross on it, or a tattoo, or some reference of a verse that you know, or you got 1 Corinthians 13 tattooed down your side, that's not knowing Jesus. Knowing Jesus is the best decision you can ever make, that will change your heart, change your life, that will bring you forgiveness for everything that you identify with in your own life, the lies that you believe about yourself, the bad things that have happened to you, the things that you've done. Those things aren't what define you. Jesus steps in and he changes you. You need that in your life, that thing, that empty space, that thing that you've been chasing after. You're just like, it doesn't matter how much money I get. It doesn't matter how good I do in school, how much affirmation I get from girls, from guys, whatever it is, or lack thereof. I feel empty. What's the point of life? It's a waste. We just live for like 80 years and maybe we retire for a couple of years and we're lucky enough to have some fun in Florida before we die. Why? It feels empty. Nothing about life is truly good news if you don't have Jesus at the center of that news. And the truth of Jesus, the gospel of Jesus as we read in the Bible, as God presented, the truth of theology is that Jesus and the way he calls us to live, to pattern our lives after him, that is truly good news. Because the opposite, idols in your life and our culture, it will squeeze every drop out of your life. It'll drain you like a battery, and it'll leave you empty on the other side of it. So don't let it. With everything in your life, chase after Jesus. With everything you have, chase after Jesus. There are so many options out there. You will never run out of opportunities of different things to believe in. There's so many religions. There's no new ones popping up all the time. And religions aren't really the thing that we run into anymore. It's ideologies. It's political systems. It's these ways that we're going to change the world, that we're going to come in and liberate the world with these new ideas. But the reality is, if you don't have Jesus at it, there's always going to be corrupt people manning those ideas. And so they will, even if they're meant to be good at the beginning, even if the intentions are fantastic, they will always deteriorate because people are driving them. The only thing that will actually deliver on changing the world around you and changing your life is Jesus, is God, who is the same today as he was yesterday and will always be the same. You can rely on him. He loves you. He forgives you. There's hope at the other side of following Jesus. And that's the good news. That's the best news. So don't settle in life. Don't settle for all the lies that society will tell you. And listen, enjoy your life. I'm not saying society is all bad. I'm not saying hide in your house. But I'm saying that if you find your value in the things that society is telling you that you should seek after, that you should chase in the rat race of life, and that's what you want, and that's what you identify with, you will never be happy. But I promise you this with everything in my heart from my own experience, the things you will face in life, the hard times, the good times, when you feel alone, when you feel like you aren't enough or that something's going wrong in your world, listen, Jesus is enough. Jesus calls you enough. Jesus sees you for who you were made to be, not for the mistakes you've made. He died on the cross for you. He knows you, he loves you, he forgives you, and all you need to do is to accept that. You need to chase after him, not the other things, with everything that you can. And I promise, at the other side of discipline, at the other side of hard work, at the other side of what is actual truth, you will find the hope that you're looking for. You'll find it. In John 8:31-32, it says, to the Jews who had believed him, Jesus said, if you hold to my teachings, you are really my disciples. Then you will know truth, and the truth will set you free. So maybe tonight you're here and you've been chasing for a long time. You feel like you're trapped. You feel like you haven't found truth. You feel like you just can't find that good news. Nothing feels good about your life. Or everything on paper looks great. Everyone else would think my life is great, and I think everyone else would want to be more like me, or I have money like me, or have, position at work like me, get the promotions, do well in school. Everything looks great. But deep in your heart, you're feeling like you're empty in your heart and in your soul. You feel like you've just been chasing after a carrot on a stick in front of you. Nothing's fulfilling. Nothing's enough. Jesus is enough. You can be so much more. It can be so much more. I see so many young adults who are just chasing everything that isn't enough and will never fulfill them. I've done this in my life. I see it's a human nature. But maybe no one's ever stood in front of you and told you the truth. There's so much more for you. Don't miss it. Do everything you can to chase that down. You owe it to yourself to leave no rock unturned in the discovery of what is truly good news. And I'm here to tell you tonight, Jesus is that good news. So the band's gonna play. I just want you to stand if you want. You can stay seated if you want, whatever you're comfortable with for this song, and just contemplate that. Seek what is good. Worship what is true. Don't settle, because Jesus is standing right in front of you, and he wants to fulfill your whole world. You can stand together.